Hey friends, welcome back to the Do Cool Shit podcast. It's me, Meryl, and today we are going to talk about values. Everybody has values. You have values. And there are things that you were probably raised with, or at least some version of them. Your values are shaped by things like your family and your experiences and the things that have mattered to you over the course of your life. Values aren't something that you earn or just like you're born with. They're in you because of you, and they're kind of unique to you in various ways. There is a big quote unquote problem when it comes to values, and that is that most people never actually name them or have them clearly defined. They never have sat down and gotten clear on what they are. They've never looked at a list and like sorted through it and picked out the things that drive them. And when your values are just kind of floating around inside of you and they're unnamed and undefined and they're just kind of running in the background, it's really hard for them to do their job effectively. They can't necessarily guide you, they can't anchor you. They just kind of exist underneath everything. And this actually explains a lot. It explains a lot of why life can feel chaotic or stressful in ways that may be hard to explain. A lot of why certain situations create that tight, off feeling in your body, even when nothing may feel technically wrong. And a lot of why you can be doing everything quote unquote right and still feel like something's missing. It's also, and this is the one, I think about really often, is why behavior change and consistency are so hard for so many people. So many people assume it's a discipline problem, quote unquote problem, or motivation, quote unquote problem. There's a lot of people that assume that they just need to want it more or try harder, or they haven't found the right plan for them. But something that I see over and over again is it often comes down to values and the behavior or the behaviors they're trying to build, or even things that they don't know that they're trying to build, like peace and confidence in themselves and their choices and how they operate. It's just not connected to anything clearly defined inside of them. It's not connected to things that really matter to them at their core, and also maybe not connected to things that they want to build, those clearly defined things that they want to build. So it kind of stays fragile, and it kind of can depend on like perfect conditions, maybe external pressure or accountability. Maybe it depends on that type of motivation that is really heightened, that like high want and drive to do something. And then whenever these things slip or aren't present, the behavior kind of goes with them. So the thing I really want to talk about is when you do know your values, when they're named and clear and actually present to you, cool shit happens. Something changes. It becomes way freaking harder to not do the things that align with them. It's not necessarily easier in the sense that it stops being challenging or inconvenient. Life doesn't get less complicated, right? But the pull toward your values is so much stronger than the resistance. You stop needing perfect conditions. You stop needing to feel that type of motivation, and you can kind of move along the motivation spectrum into that more deeply rooted motivation. And you do the thing because not doing it feels like abandoning yourself or going against yourself. And that costs more than, doing it, or the feeling that's associated with doing it, the discomfort, ever could. And that's the difference between behavior that depends on willpower and behavior that's rooted in something real and something deep. So that's what we're going to get more into today. And I'm going to talk about why values matter, of course, a little bit more, what they actually are, why they're connected to both behavior change and your nervous system in ways that I think will genuinely surprise you, and what it actually looks like when you start living in alignment with your values. And I'm going to share a little bit of my own story. I'm going to walk you through some exercises. And by the end of the episode, you should have some real stuff to work with. I also am going to include a free resource, which is a full list of values with some reflection prompts that will be available on wickedironstrength.com, or I'll also link it in the show notes, and I'll tell you more about it before we get to the exercise. But make sure you go grab that at some point, either now or later, and just, use it. So let's start with what are values and why do they matter as much as I'm saying that they do. Values are what is meaningful to you in who you want to be, not who you think you should be, not who your parents wanted you to be or who your job kind of requires you to be, who you actually want to be. They are your internal compass, the thing you return to, whether you know you're doing it or not, when you're deciding how to act. And the reason they matter so much for behavior change is because behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every action you take is on some level an answer to the question of what matters here. And if you don't consciously know the answer to that question, your brain kind of fills it in for you. And usually with something that is urgent or comfortable or familiar or easy or driven by something like fear, rather than something that actually reflects what you care about consciously and in your present self. You can think of it like values drive behavior, and, behavior drives pretty much everything else, right? And that kind of seems like oversimplified. And it is. Most of us are trying to hack this in so many ways, or so many people are trying to hack this and trying to force behaviors without ever digging deep, and then can't figure out why things don't stick, which is what we do here in this podcast, right? So if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to the rest of the podcast, please do so, because that's what we do. You can build or have built for you the most perfect nutrition plan, the most structured training program that gets you from A to Z, the most detailed schedule. And if none of it connects to anything that actually matters to you at a values level, then you're just going to white knuckle it for kind of like, I'm not going to say as long as possible, but until a point for a while. And then it's inevitably going to drop off because there's no real anchor. And there's a lot of all or nothing that can come into play here. There's a lot of that perfectionist aspect. There's a lot of what I mentioned before with things need to be in a certain type of condition in order to work. And because life doesn't happen like that, when something happens, things fall off. And this is why I spend time on this in my coaching and why I'm doing a whole episode on this. This is something I really encourage people to do before they get into the like nitty-gritty of things with me when it comes to like nutrition or training, because the work of understanding what that person actually values is the thing that makes every other part of the work make sense, and is the thing that consistency and persistence is going to kind of rely on. It's a necessary piece. Okay, so here's where this gets really interesting, at least to me, and where I think a lot of conversation around values is incomplete, because it's not just about knowing your why. And that is an important thing, and that has become a lot more present in this space. Let's just say people saying, know your why, that you need to do that. And also it has to go deeper than that. Let's talk about what happens in your nervous system when you're living out of alignment with your values. So your nervous system at its most basic job is scanning for safety. Constantly, every moment of every single day, it's kind of asking, am I safe? Is this environment safe? Is what I'm doing consistent with who I am, maybe? Or, it's scanning for threat based on your life experiences, which can get a little bit complex and complicated. And I'm not going to deep dive into that right now. And the question your nervous system is kind of quietly asking is whether your actions match your identity, whether your behaviors reflect what you believe. And when there's a gap, when what you're doing doesn't line up with what you actually care about, your nervous system kind of registers that as a threat. It's not that like dramatic run from a predator threat. It's a little bit more low grade. It's kind of like this constant hum of, something is off. Something doesn't feel right. I'm not being true to something. Whether you know what that is, in your mind or not, your nervous system is sensing that. And that's not a small thing. That's kind of this chronic low grade signal of misalignment. And that is exhausting. And there is that tension and anxiety and restlessness that can be hard to name, and it can like compound and build over time. And what we know with having that state be present chronically, like, it's chaotic. It can feel scattered. It can feel like you're always pushing uphill, or like no matter how much you do, it's never quite enough. And, oftentimes when people kind of describe this to me without the language for it, this is what it feels like to live in misalignment with values. But if we flip that, what happens when you are living in alignment, when your actions reflect what actually matters to you? Your nervous system settles in this way that is like, this feels like me. There's less friction. There's less internal debate. There's less convincing yourself to follow through because the thing you're doing is connected to something real inside of you, not just an arbitrary rule that you set or someone else set for you, or, an arbitrary, or maybe not arbitrary, just any type of like goal that you're chasing. So here's an example. Integrity is one of my core values. It's something that I identified a few years ago. And this has lived inside of me for a really, really, really long time. And I never could name it before. And once I was able to name it, so many things clicked into place. It was like this puzzle that came together. It's really complicated, really large, like hundreds of piece puzzle, maybe thousands, I don't know. And I know that it is core for me because of how I feel when I am not in integrity. Not just emotionally, but in my body. There is tension. There's almost a physical tightening. Like if I'm being dishonest with someone, or when I'm telling myself something I know isn't true, or when I'm doing something that doesn't line up with what I said I would do, or even when it comes to things that rub me the wrong way about other people, it's usually because it goes against this value. It's uncomfortable enough that genuinely it's hard for me to stay there. And that discomfort moves me back towards integrity. And I know I often talk about discomfort not being a bad thing, or, feeling uncomfortable, but this is a knowledge of like, this is something that is not correct. And that's a nervous system signal. Like my body knows kind of before my brain even catches on. And when I'm aligned, when I'm being fully honest, when I'm following through on what I said, when I'm showing up in a way that future me would be proud of, there's this sense of, I don't know, like ease isn't quite the right word. It's more like this groundedness. It is definitely regulated. I'm standing on solid ground instead of trying to kind of like keep my balance and find my footing. That's what values alignment feels like in my body. And once you feel it, it's something that you move towards. It's once you know, then you know, right? So you start to make decisions based partly on that felt sense. Does it feel like I'm on solid ground, or does it feel like I'm wobbly? And when I bring this framework into coaching, the shift I see in clients is like truly remarkable. They stop making decisions purely out of maybe like logic or things that they believe to be true based on things that other people told them, or willpower, and they start asking different questions. They start to really tune into themselves. Does this feel like me? Is this in line with what actually matters to me? And, those questions have way more staying power than does this fit my macros or something like that. When people do this work, it's really interesting. I just had a conversation last night in our self-sabotage solution group about this, because we're working through values right now and working on putting them into practice. So someone came back after doing this work, and she said two things that kind of seem like they should be contradictory but aren't. So she said that it sent her down a different path than expected. She had a situation and she left and she's like, who was that? I've never done that before. She was in a situation and she felt the tension of, I need to say something. I need to speak up because what's going on right now is going against my values. And in the past, she would have just stayed quiet to kind of like keep the peace or not offend someone or whatever else would have been honestly a stress response in this. And she just felt this pull because it was going so strongly against her values to speak up. And it felt very peaceful to her to do. She said, I did it and it felt, uncomfortable. It was new, it was different. And when I did it, it was like, oh, this feels correct. This actually is easier than I thought it was going to be. And she did it. And she did it in a way that felt correct for her. And she was very at peace with doing that. And she created kind of this new pathway. This can be something that we talked about in here where sometimes people think they value one thing, and when they actually dig into it, they find out that it was something else. Or they find out that the path they were on was someone else's values, not theirs. Maybe the way, like for this person, keeping the peace, not saying something was like, it was important to do that, to not offend someone else, to not be rude, to not cause friction in here. And, maybe that came from family or, somewhere else in her past. But that was actually causing her a lot of chaos when she was operating like that. She said, I went home and I didn't even think about eating, where in the past I would have probably grabbed a whole bunch of food and just ate a whole bag of chips before I even noticed. And this time I just felt different. I felt more true to myself. I felt more at peace. And the behaviors actually changed afterward. So, this can feel kind of destabilizing at first. It can feel like, wait, is this really mine? What do I actually want? It may open up questions that take some sitting with. And again, it can feel really surprising, really shocking, even in the best way, because on the other side, there's peace, or at least there's learning and knowledge. What's possible. Often more peace than what people expect. Maybe the first time they've ever even felt that way. And that's really, really, really freaking cool. That lightness that can be felt is alignment. That's what happens when the nervous system stops doing that chronic, low grade work of holding on to something that doesn't fit or being on that high alert. So if you've been grinding at something and nothing really seems to be sticking, if you're feeling like you're doing all the right things and still feel off, and if the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels almost demoralizing no matter how hard you work, it's probably not the problem that you think it is. There's probably values alignment problem in here. And this totally solvable. Just takes a little bit of honesty and sitting with yourself. So let's do the work in identifying your values. So I put together this resource. It's a pretty extensive list of values with that reflective exercise. And it has a ton of values on there, which, sounds overwhelming and honestly often is for people when they look at that list. But I want you to have a comprehensive list, because sometimes the word that actually names what you care about isn't the first one you think of. There's a lot of things on here that kind of like overlap or mean similar things, and that's okay. So grab that list, and I want you to do this a first pass through it. So go through and just circle every value that resonates. Don't overthink it. Don't edit yourself. Just if something pulls at you, circle it. You'll probably end up with like 15 to 20. That's totally fine. Now go through the circled values and divide them into two groups. So we're going to do one group is your core values. They're values that you already live by. They're active in you right now. You can feel them. And more importantly, I'd say you feel it when they're being violated, whether it's by you or by someone else. There's that physical sign, like I talked about with integrity. There is tension or discomfort, a kind of tightening that's hard to ignore. And if you could like barely tolerate being out of it, even when it would have been easier, then that's a signal that it's a core value. If you feel like really ewy, almost sick when you're not, in it, then that's the core value. Your body kind of tells you that. You just have to listen. So I want you to try to work to identify 3. Maybe you have more, that's okay, but just narrow it to 3 for now. And the 3 that feel most non-negotiable, the 3 that if someone asked you to live against them, you would genuinely be like, no, I can't do that without paying a significant cost that feels almost not worth it. And then the second group is going to be your leaning into values. These are the values that represent who you're becoming. Not necessarily who you fully are yet. They're the ones you want to grow into. The ones that when you're living them, you feel proud of yourself. But you might just not be there like consistently yet. So let me give you an example here. Courage is a value that I've been leaning into. It did not come naturally to me. Fear of failing, of not being good at something, of judgment stopped me so often. And I kept not doing things because I was afraid of what might happen if I did them and they went quote unquote wrong. And when I named courage as a value I wanted to lean into, big stuff shifted. When I felt afraid, instead of stopping, I had somewhere to go. I went to courage, and it made doing the thing easier. The fear didn't disappear, but I had direction, and I had this knowing of like, no, I'm leaning into courage. And that's what I'm going to do instead of just like hitting a wall. I had direction. And I could then change patterns. That's what a leaning into value does. It gives you a move when you feel kind of stuck. It gives you something to go towards instead of something to run from or repeat. So pick 3 of those, 3 values that you want to be part of who you're becoming. The ones where when you're living them, something in you thinks like, yes, this is who I want to be. And then the resource has a reflection section for both of these. And it'll walk you through how to describe why each one is core, how you feel when it's violated, what it looks like when you're leaning in, and what tends to stop you. It's really not a long exercise whatsoever, and it's a very meaningful one. And then when you're done, I'm really encouraging you to put those 6 values somewhere visible. Don't just keep them buried in a journal or in a note section. Put it on your phone screen. Put it on a sticky note. Somewhere that's in your line of sight when you're making decisions. Because values are only useful when they are active, when they are in your mind, when they are in the room with you, when you can actually refer to them instead of just knowing somewhere in the back of your mind they exist. Like oftentimes people do this and then they'll forget even what they are unless they're actively and purposefully like continuing to return to them. That's when behavior starts to shift, not because you're working harder, but because you have that compass. Values are something that, again, they're very, very practical. It's not some like bullshit self-help concept. They really drive behavior. They regulate your nervous system. They're the difference between working hard at something that doesn't fit and working hard at something that feels like you. There's identity. That's part of it. The discomfort you feel when you stray from them is very fucking real. That is your body saying, pay attention. And the peace you feel when you move toward them and you act in alignment with them is also very fucking real. And it's not a coincidence. If you do this exercise and something surprising comes up, or you just want to share in general, I totally want to hear about it. Seriously, I freaking love talking to people about their values and what happens when they identify them and actually start to use them in their day to day. Send me a email or a DM. Like, I truly, truly would love to have this conversation. And if you do this work and you realize you want support that goes deeper, whether it's in your training or your nutrition or the mindset behavior work that makes it all stick, I would also love to talk. There's various coaching options that I have available, and it just starts with a conversation. So grab that values resource, do it, use it, give yourself the gift of actually knowing what's driving you and having direction, and then go do the cool shit. And I will see you next time.